All right. Hi. Title 49, Chapter 7, National Railroad Passenger Corp. Amtrak, Part 700, Organization Function Available Information. 701, Amtrak Freedom of Information Act Program. All right, Part 700, Organization Functioning Available Information, Purpose 701, Purpose 702, Organization Function of Amtrak, 703, Availability Document and Assistance Information, Authority Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552A12, Sub 701, Purpose the part of the scope of the organization function of the Amtrak and the availability of the public documents and information concerning of the policies and procedures activities. 702 Organization and Functioning of Amtrak. The creation of the National Railroad Passenger Corp. Amtrak was authorized with the Railroad Passenger Service Act as amended in 84 Statute 1327, Title 45 U.S. Standard Code 5412, Intent Sequence. The act requires the Amtrak to be operated with advantage for the profit as a profit corporation that was incorporated under the District of Columbia Business Corporation Act, subject to the provisions of the statute's extent not inconsistent with the act, that is provided with a balanced transportation system by developing, operating, and an improvable intercity railroad passenger service. The act also states the Amtrak will not be the agency or established of the United States government of the Amtrak. Thus, in this corporation created by the Congress to compete for the transportation business for the inner-city traveler with the end of the traveler mode. The address is headquartered of 400 North Capitol Street, North Washington, D.C. 2001. Telephone 202-383-3000. Board of Directors. Amtrak's major policy established by its board with a directive of the 9 members of the board, with the selected as follows. The Secretary of the Transportation serves as an ex officio member of the Amtrak President. Ex officio is the chairman of the board, with the 3 members are appointed by the President of the President of the United States. Confirmed by the Senate, representing with the labor and state, with the governor of Bismuth, the 2 representing with the community, with the authorities are selected by the president from lists drawn up by those authorities, and 2 selected by the corporation preferred by the preferred stockholder, the Department of Transportation officer for the central management. Amtrak is managed by the president. Management committee consisting of 4 executive vice presidents, with all reporting with the executive vice president or 11 vice presidents reported representing sales, transportation, marketing, planning, and the development of the computer service, the labor relations, finance, for the treasurer, of the personal and passenger operating service, the government affairs, the operations, maintenance, engineering, and the general counsel for the areas handled with the special matters with the authority of the vice president, such as the corporate communication, safety, real estate, procurement, materials management, policies, and security contract contract administration. Inner audit are supervised by the assistant vice president and directors, regional and field structure. The need for the decentralization of the function in these areas of the passenger services for the transportation operations helped led to the creation of the American regional and field structure. The field offices are located with the major cities such as the Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Albany, Boston, Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles. Pursuant to the overall policies established by the headquarters in Washington, D.C., the office for the handle of the mayor's life with the assignment of the scheduling of the employees who work on the board, move the train, for the purchase of the stowage and preparation of the food, for the dining, for the maintenance, for the rehabilitation, for the rolling stock, daily operating arrangements such as the makeup of the trains and cleaning of the repair of the car of the train route system. The Amtrak's basic route system has been established pursuant to the statutory guidelines, and in some cases, the specific statutory directive out of the route system, covering with about 23,000 route miles. The Amtrak owns a right-of-way of about 2,600 track miles in the Northeast Corridor, Washington, New York to Boston, New Haven, Springfield, and Philadelphia, the Harrisburg, small segments of the track near the Albany, New York, and Kalamazoo, Michigan, in the Northeast Corridor, where Amtrak trains are running an operation crew for the consisting of the Amtrak employees. On other routes, the Amtrak operates trains and tracks about 20 differently privately owned railroads and compensates the railroads for the use of the facilities for the service of their employees, including engineers, conductors, maintenance for the personnel they provide. The railroads are responsible for the condition of the roadbed, for the coordinating with the flow of the traffic over the lines. Operation Amtrak provides with about 250 trains daily, with serving about 500 stations in over 40 states. The Amtrak owns most of its cars, locomotives, some of the stations, most of the repair facility, the capital improvements, almost half of its operating loss for the support and principal throughout federal financing, with some of the state and regional local financing support from the slum trains and stations. Congress requires Amtrak to earn a revenue equivalent to at least 50% of the operating costs, and currently does so. 5. Revenue production. The sale of the ticket for the transportation and accommodations of the Amtrak principal store for the revenue accomplished through the Amtrak ticket agent stations of the travel agencies. 5. Central reservation offices with the serve of the nationwide telephone network, national timetable to contain with the basic information about routes and stations and services. 703. Availability of the documents, assistance, and information. A member of the public having the need for assistance and information for the concern with any of these matters described in 702 should be addressed with his or her and concerned with the letter with the other written with the communication directed with the appropriate of the vice president of the director of the corporate communications at Amtrak. Bring such communications to the attention of the appropriate official if they are misdirected in the first instance for the request for the records under the Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552A. 552A3 for the Freedom of Information Act are to be made according to the provision of Title 49 CFR 701.4. The national train timetable described in Statute 702.5 of the widely distributed with the confidential United States are available to the major cities of the European, Canada, Mexico when they are updated usually April or October each year. Each printing involved with about 1 million copies. They are ordinance available to the staff of the Amtrak station with the copies for the usual kept at the hand with the offices about 9,800 travel agents are authorized to sell Amtrak tickets to personnel unable to obtain with a copy of the local should request one from the director of the corporate communications in Washington, D.C. with a headquarters of the timetable to pick for the major Amtrak train routes on a map of the United States. Most of the remainder of the booklet show for the schedule for the specific train. Several of the pages show you the travel information dealing with the availability of the assistance handicapped travelers, the cab service. Purchase tickets on the board with the the credit cards and personal checks and handling on baggage refund of the the unused tickets baggage refunds for unused tickets and similar matters. Also available to the matter of the public and the most staff Amtrak stations usually maintained in the office of the travel agencies authorized to sell the Amtrak tickets and a copy of the reservation ticket manual RTM, which constitutes the company compendium information governing with the Amtrak and with the furnishing transportation to travel the public. It contains the substantial segments of the dedicated with the following topic: the Amtrak computer systems, the communication codes, interline service bag agreements with the passenger baggage services, customer relation functions, reservation policies, procedures, acceptance for the checks and credit cards, refunds, misconnections policy, tickets. Taking accommodation, employee pass, travel location from the map to the Amtrak station, intermodule state map. The full statement of the Amtrak tariffs contained with the fare of the point-to-point travel to regain regional plan travel, all relevant travel of conditions such as the excursion discounts, family plans, accommodations, etc. is contained in the probably published official Railway Guide, which is available to subscription with a publisher of 424 West 33rd Street, New York at 1001. A copy of each of the good usually to be found with each of the staff of the American station at the office of the travel agency authorized to sell Amtrak for the tariff changes which occur between the issues of the guide are published with a widely distributed with the American Amtrak pending with a publication of the next issue of the guide. Each of the documents is described in paragraph B through D with a section available for the public of the inspection during the regular business hour of the Amtrak Office of the Amtrak Freedom of the Information Office of the Headquarters, Title 400 North Capitol Street, North Washington, D.C. 2001, at the Office of the Division Management, Home Human Relations, New Haven, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Each document has its own index, such as indexing is useful only with the context for the document with which it pertains to saying. Request for the indices is uncommon. The Amtrak has a determined publication for the indices for the described in Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552A2 will be unnecessary for practical capability. Our Part 701, Amtrak Freedom of Information Act Program, 701.1, General Provision, 701.2, Definition, 701.3, Policy, 701.4, Amtrak Public Information, 701.5, Requirements of Making Requests, 701.6, Release of Processing Procedure, 701.7, Time of the Response of the Request, 701.8, Responses to Requests, 701.9, Business Information, 701.10, Appeals, 701.11, Fees, 701.12, Other Rights and Services. 701.1 General Provisions. The part containing the rules of the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, Amtrak, filed with the process for the request for the records under the Freedom of Information Act of the Title 5 U.S. Standard Code with the Section 552A. 552, information routinely provided to the public on train timetable to press for the release that may be obtained with the Amtrak website with the www.amtrak without the following Amtrak's Freedom of Information Act procedures. 701.2 definitions. Left with the contact required for the otherwise in part with the masculine pronoun, with include with the feminine gender, and include with the being with includes but not limited to the Amtrak Corporation, me with the National Railroad Passenger Service. Appeals mean the request submitted with the president over the Amtrak with the designee over the review over the adverse intentional determination. Business days means a working day for the Saturday and Sunday. Legal public holidays are excluded with the computing of the response for the time of the Processing Freedom of Information Act request. Disclose and disclosure making of the records available for the examination copy of the furnished for the copy of the non-exempt response records. Electronic data means of record for the information, including email that are created with the store for the retrievable for the electronic means. Expected information mean for the information expect for the disclosure permitted in Title 5 to the 552A. Final determination mean for the decision president of the Amtrak with the designer designee concerning with the request for the review of the advisor initial determination received with the response to Freedom of Information Act. Freedom of Information Act officer for the meaning for the Amtrak official with the designated with the fulfill the responsibility implementing the administration with the Freedom of Information Act is specifically designated under this part. Freedom of Information Act FOA or FOIA means the statute codified in Section 552 Title 5 United Standard Code amended. Initial determination means for the decision for the Amtrak with the Freedom of Information Act officer with a response for the request for the information under the Freedom of Information Act. Pages need for the paper for the copies for the stand for the officer for the side with the most for the equivalent of the other media president means the president or the chief of the officer over the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, Amtrak, or designee. Record means any writing or drawing the map of the recording tape of the film with a photograph of the documentary material with which information preserved with any of the format, including electronic format. Record must exist in the possession of the control of the Amtrak at the time of the request. Subject for this part of the Freedom of Information Act allowing are not included within the definition of the work record. Limited the library materials compiled with the reference purpose of the object for the substantial intrinsic value. Routinely transmittal sheet of note for the filling note with which do not also include the information common for the statement of the substance to anything that is not tangible to document record for the such for the individual memory of the oral communication. For object for the articles wherever they are historical value of that evidence. The request means for any of the request for the records made in pursuant with the Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552. Requester or requesting party means that any of the persons submitted for the request for the Amtrak response for records means for the document with the electronic record is determined to be for the scope of the Freedom of Information Act request. All right, 7013, the policy. The Amtrak will make records of the corporation available to the public to the greatest particular extent with the keeping of the spirit of the law. Therefore, the records of the corporation are available electronically, which can be accessed through the Amtrak Freedom of Information Act website with a www.amtrak.com /FOIA or Amtrak.com is provided with the part with the explanation so that the corporation specifically determines that it should not be disclosed either in the public interest of the protection of the public rights for the efficient conduct of the public and corporate business, but only limited extent with the holding of the permitted law. A record of the corporation parts for therefore with the withheld with the disclosure for the corporation reasonable foresee with the disclosure for the harm and interest of the protected with the Freedom of Information Act exemption with the disclosure and with the prohibited by law the disclosure of the properly with the constituted advisory committee to Congress of the federal agency does not waive the exemption in the event of the full disclosure of the requested record is not possible with the reasonable or segregatable portion of the record will be made available to the requesting person after the deletion of the exemption portion of the entire record may be withheld and determination made with the non-exemption material inextricably intertwined with the disclosure would leave only with the essential meaning with the left of the words afraid of when it can be reasonably assumed that a skillful and knowledgeable person could reconstruct the deleted information. The procedure for this part apply with the records for the in existence for the time of the request for the corporation has no obligation to create the record solely for the purpose of the making it available to under the Freedom of Information Act to provide with the record that will be created in the future. Each officer employed for the corporation dealing with the Freedom of Information Act will quote the directive of the corporate with the making of the records available to the disclosure under the act for the prompt man for the consistent with this part. The Freedom of Information Act time limits will not begin to run until the request has been identified made by the owner of the act of the deemed the receipt of the Freedom of Information Act officers generally with the member of the public comply with the procedure for the establishment of the public obtaining the records of the Freedom of Information Act. The request shall have received prompt attention and a response shall be made within 20 business days. Amtrak Public Information. Amtrak Freedom of Information Act website. Amtrak will make it available electronically. Records contracted with the corporation required for the under the Freedom of Information Act to be made available to public inspection, which can be expected accessed by the Amtrak Freedom of Information Act at the www.amtrak/freedom of information or amtrak.com. Frequently requested information. The Freedom of Information Act requires the copy of the records regardless of the form of the format that have been released for the presumed by the Freedom of Information Act requires the Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552A3, but to be publicly available in the electronic format is because of the nature of the subject matter that have been become likely to become the subject for the subsequent requests for the substantial same record that have been requested for the 3 or more times. Amtrak should have decided on a case-to-case basis whether the records fall into the first category. Frequently requested Freedom of Information Act records are based on the following factor previously explained. Appearances with a similar record of the nature for the type of the information contained within the record in the records identify the number of the requesters and whether they are widespread media of the commercial interest of the records. Guide for the making the request, a guide have how to the Freedom of Information Act for the request for the record for the Amtrak shall be made available to the public upon request of Amtrak major information systems will describe by the guide. 7015 requirements of making the request. General requirements of the Freedom of Information Act request can be made by any person for the defined in Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 5512 and with the encompassment of the individuals including foreign citizens, partnerships, corporations, association, local, state, tribal, or foreign governments, and Freedom of Information Act requests may not be made by a federal agency. A request must be written and indicated that it is being made with the honor of the Freedom of Information Act and provide with the adequate description of the records. However, the request should also include the applicable information regarding the fees that is specified in paragraphs D and E of the section. How to submit a request for the request letter for the envelope should be with the marked prominently either the Freedom of Information Act or Freedom of Information Act request to ensure the properly routed. The request if it may be addressed for the Freedom of Information off of the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, 16 Massachusetts Avenue, Northeast Washington, D.C. 2002. Requests will also be accepted fast mile with the 202-906-2004 via email with the Freedom of Information Act request at Amtrak.com. Amtrak can be not assured of the timely satisfactory response under this part will be given the written request addressed for the Amtrak officers employed without the Freedom of Information Office of the Amtrak employees receive the communication from the nature of the Freedom of Information Act request shall be forwarded with the Freedom of Information Act officers expectation for the Amtrak shall divide with the requesting party with the date with the improperly with the address request for the received of the Freedom of Information Act, content of the request for the description of the records, identification of the records, and with the Freedom of Information Act responsible by the requester of the record should show. So it should be described in sufficient detail with the Amtrak personnel again located with a reasonable amount with the effort of the possible. The request should be include specific information such as the date and the title, the name, and all of the recipient and subject matter with the record of the final destination for the number. Other pertinent detail for each for the record with the categories for records sought for. The requesters may contact the Amtrak Freedom of Information Act public liaison to discover the records they seek to receive the assistance for the describing the records requesting. Reformulation of the request. Amtrak is not obligated to act with the request until the requester of the provide with the sufficient information to locate the record. But the Amtrak may offer the assistance for the identify with the record for the reformulating a request that they where the description is considered insufficient with the production of the volume of this record required for the considerable number of the work hours would be required to be inferred with the basis of the corporation. Freedom of Information Act shall not notify the requester within 10 minutes date of the type of the information that will facilitate this request facilitate the search. The requesting party shall be given the opportunity to supply with the additional information may submit with the revised request. The requester may also contact the Amtrak Freedom of Information Act public liaison and receive the assistance of reformulating, modifying their request. The payment of the fees. The submission of the Freedom of Information Act request constitutes with agreement to pay with the applicable fees excess up to $25 unless the requesting party specifies the willing to pay the greater or lesser amount of the seeks a fee waiver reduction in fees. Fees in excess for the $25 when the Amtrak determined the estimate for the applicable fee is likely to exceed $25. The requesting party should be notified of the estimate for the actual fees unless the commitment that has been made in advance to pay all the fees and only a portion of the fees can be estimated readily. Amtrak should divide the request for the estimated fee for the maybe portion of the total fee. In order to protect the request for the large unexpected fee, the Amtrak will request a specific commitment. We will establish the determinants of the fees will exceed $100. The request shall not be considered for the receipt that further processing should not be carried out until the requesting party would agree with the pay with the anticipated total fee of such agreement that may be memorialized in writing the notice for the underwriter. The paragraph will offer the requesting party the opportunity to discover the matter in order to reformulate the request to meet the requester's need as a lower cost. The Amtrak will hold the ABC with the required amount with the time of the request requiring agreement to pay the fee while therefore deem the request of the closed. The action will not prevent the requesting party from refiling the Freedom of Information Act request of the free commitment with a subsequent date. Fees in excess of $250 if the Amtrak is estimated determined the allowable charge that are likely to exceed $250 in advance deposit over the entire fee may be required before continuing the request for process of the request. Information regarding the fee of the category in order to determine the appropriate fee of the category of the request should indicate whether the information sought for the intent of the commercial use of whether the requesting party is a member of an educational, non-commercial, scientific institution represented in the news of the media records concerning the other individuals requested of the records concerning the other individuals. Either the following may be required in order to process the request: an notarized written authorization signed by the individual pertaining to the discovery of these records to the requesting party, together with a copy of the photo ID of the individual, proof of the individual is deceased, a copy of the death and certificate of the obituary form, and identification of the request of the party may also be required. Such records are also subject to any of the applicable Freedom of Information Act exemptions. 7016. The release and processing procedure. General provision for determining the record for the response to the request for the Amtrak will ordinarily include the only record that exists that are in the possession of control of the corporation of the date of the search will begun, and the other date of the use of the requesting party will be informed of the date of the authority of the grant of the denial of the request. Amtrak Freedom of Information Officer is authorized to grant or to deny any request for the records. Notice of the referral. Amtrak refers to all of any of the parties responsibility responding with the request of any of their organization requesting the party with the notified of the referral shall be noted, not be considered for the denial of the access within the meaning of the part. All consultant referrals or requests will be handled according with the date that the Freedom of Information Act request was initially received. All right, creative record. Creating a record. There are no obligation for the part of the Amtrak to create a record to satisfy the Freedom of Information Act. With the Amtrak may create the new record, it is in sole discretion. However, the doing so would result in a more useful response to the requesting party that would be less burdensome to the Amtrak for the providing existing records. Call for the creating of the such record may not be in charge of the sub-requesters unless the fee of the creating of the record is equal and less of the fee of the which be charged with the providing with the existing record. Incomplete record. The record requested but not complete with the time of the request, or Amtrak may have the discretion and inform the request of the complete with the non-exempt records will be provided with the available without having to submit for the additional request. Electronic records. Amtrak is not obligated to provide for the request of the electronic records where the creation of the record for the program in particular format would result in a significant expenditure of the breach over the interfere with the corporation operations. 7017. The time response for the request. General, the time limit of the prescribed the Freedom of Information Act will begin only with the after the requirements of submitting of the request established in 7015 to have been met with the request of the deemed the receipt of the Freedom of Information Act with the request of the record shall be considered to have received on the later following day if the requester agree with the written and the pay of the applicable fee in accordance with the 7015D. The fees have been waived in accordance with the 70111K. Payments of advance has been received with the requester when the receipt required in accordance with the 70111I. Time of the responding of the request set forth with the paragraph B of this section may be delayed if the requester does not sufficiently identify the free category applicable to the request. The requester does not state for the willingness to pay all the fee of the requester, seeing the fees waived but does not address the criteria for the fee waiver set forth in 70111K. Fee waiver requested denied, but the requester does not include the alternative statement of indicate that the requesting party willing to pay with all the fees. The initial determination, whenever with the possibility of initial determination of the relief that denied the record shall be made within 20 business days after the receipt of the request for the unusual circumstances described in paragraph D of the section. The time initial determination may be extended before the 10 business days. Multiple track processing. One, the Amtrak may be the two more processing track to distinguish between the simple with the complexity expenses. Expedited request based on the amount of the working time needed to request the proper process of the question and the number of the pages involved. In general, when the request of the receipt of the Amtrak Freedom of Information Act office will review the categories and with the tracking the purpose of the request within each of the track will be processed, and then according to the date of the receipt, the Freedom of Information Officer may be the contact with the requester with the question does not appear with the qualified with the fast track process for the provided opportunity to limit the scope of the request qualified with the faster track. Such notification shall be the discretion of the Freedom of Information Act Officer that will depend largely on whether it is believed with the narrowing of the request. It could be placed the request on faster tracks. The unusual circumstance of the requesting party shall notify them writing of the time limit. The process of the request cannot be met with the cover of the unusual circumstance. It will be necessary for the extent of the time limit. The process of the request of the notification shall set forth the unusual circumstances of the extension shall include the date in which the request of the expedite to be completed. Where the extension is to be more than 10 business days, the requesting party will be afforded the opportunity to either modify the request so that it may be processed within the time limits arranged. The alternative time period for the process of the initial request modified with the request in such case for the requesting party with the right to seek assistance of the Amtrak Freedom of Information Act public liaison seeking to dispute with the resolution service of the office of the Government Information Services. The Amtrak believed that the multiple requests submitted with the requester by the group of the requesters acting with the concern with the constitute with the signal request of the word otherwise involved the unusual Circumstance of the request involved with a clearly related manner of the request may be aggregated with the multiple requests concerning unrelated material. It may not be aggregated unless the circumstance that may be justified. No delay include the need to search for the and collect for the requested record for the other facility separated by the Amtrak headquarters. Alright, the need to search for the collection and examine the development element with a separate but a distinct of the record with the signal with the need of the cancellation which should be conducted with all practicable speed with the agency's substantial interest for the determination of the request among the two or more Amtrak components that having substantial subject matter interest for the request for the exemptional circumstances. If the court has determined the exemptional circumstances exhibit defined by the Freedom of Information Act failure to comply with the time limit that should be excused for the length of the time period for the court order the suspended processing request for the appeal for the make, but they take them now for the order given the expedited the treatment and whenever they determine whether it's involved with complying with the need for which meets. Which means the circumstances in which the lack of the expedited treatment of the responsibility expected to oppose the imminent threat of the life of the physical safety of the individual, urgency of the information from the public about actual alleged Amtrak activity made with the personal primarily engaged with the dissemination of information required for the expedited process that may be made at the time of the initial request for the record for the later date. Alright, a requester seeking the expedited process must submit with the statement that certifies of the truth correct with the best with the personal knowledge of the belief of the expedited, explaining the detail of the base for the request the expedited process. The statement must accompany with the request in order to consider the responding with which for the 10-day calendar record days required for the decision expedited process accordingly access. A requester is not full-time with a member of the news media established with the person who is named with the professional activity, occupation, information dissemination throughout it may need to be a sole occupation with the requester may be establishing a particular urgency with the form of the public about the Amtrak activity for the involved with the request. Within 10 business days of the receipt of the request for the expedited the process of the Amtrak should determine whether the grant such a request with notified the requester of the decision if the request for the expedited the treatment name of the grant of the request should be given the priority with it shall be profited as soon as practicable. Amtrak shall provide prompt consideration and appeal for the decision denying expedited processing. 7018. Responsive to request. Granting of the request. For the initial determination is made with the granting of the request of the whole and part, with the requesting party shall be notified the writing and divide with any of the fees charged within 701.11e. The record shall be disclosed with the requesting party with the promptly upon payment of the applicable fee for the requesting party have the right to seek the assistance with the Amtrak Freedom of Information Act public liaison and determination of the request, the type of the denial of the requesting of the part of the shall be notified in writing with the determination of the denial of the request and any of the respective versus determination of the denial of the records. Consider the determination to withhold any of the requested record in whole and part. The determination that requested if the record does not exist, if it cannot be located, the denial of the request for the expedited treatment, the determination of the disputed fee in the matter include the denial of the request for the fee waiver. 2 deletions. Records disclosed within part shall be made more clearly to show the both of the amount of the information to leave the expedition over the deletion made, but unless for the doing so with the harmful interest of the protected by the example applicable exemption with the technically feasible amount of the information to leave the expedited exemption under the which the deletion is made with the which shall be indicated with the plate for the record where the deletion is made. 3. The content of the denial letter. The denial letter should be signed by the Freedom of Information Act for the officer of the designee, or shall include the brief the statement of the responsible versus determination individual. The Freedom of Information Act exemptions apply with the denying the request. An estimate of the volume of the information would help with the number of the page with some other reasonable form of the estimation. As estimate does not need to provide with the volume, but indicated through the deletion of the record disclosed within the part providing an estimate. With the arm of the interest of the protected by the applicable exemption statement from the appeal for the available in the 70110 with the description of the requirements of the section of the party required with the requesting of the part of the dispute with the resolution service from the Amtrak with the Amtrak's Freedom of Information Act public liaison office with the Government Information Service, the name and the title position of the person responsible for the denial. Alright, 7019, Business Information. General business information held by the Amtrak will be disclosed under the Freedom of Information Act only under the section definition for the purpose of this section following with the definition of business information mean for the commercial with the financial information held by the Amtrak that may be protected with the disclosure under the exemption 4 of the Freedom of Information Act Title 5, U.S. Standard Code 552B4. Submitter means any person with included the partnership, corporation, association, local, state, and the tribal, the foreign government's designation, business information. Submitter business information will you the good effort pay for the effort to designate the appropriate marking with either the time of submission with the responsible time. Therefore, any portion of the submission with the considered for the protected for the closure with the owner of the exemption with the 4 of the designation will expire with the 10 years after the day of the submission and level of the submitter with the request to provide the justification along with the designation period. Notice for the submitter. Amtrak shall provide the submitter with the protected with the written notice for the Freedom of Information Act requested and appeal for the business of the information when the required for the paragraph E of the sections exempt to provide for the paragraph E of the section order to to give the submitter with the opportunity to object to the disclosure any specified for the portion of the information owned with the paragraph F of the notice shall either be described with the business information requested for the include with the copies for the request of the record for the portion of the records containing the information. When notice is required, the notice shall be given and submitted by the information that has been designated with the good faith of the submitter for the information considered for the particular disclosure for the under exemption 4, where the Amtrak has the reason to believe that the information may be protected within the disclosure exemption 4. Opportunity to object with the disclosure. Amtrak will allow the submitter reasonable amount of time to determine the Amtrak within the sole description to the respond with the notice described in paragraph D of this section. 1. A detailed written statement that must be submitted by the Amtrak. If the submitter have the objection to the disclosure for the statement, they must specify with all the grounds withholding any specified portion of the information sought by the Freedom of Information Act and K for the exemption 4, they must show for the information for the trade secret for the commercial and financial information that is privileged or confidential. Unless the otherwise specified in the event of the submitter failed to respond by the time specified with the note for the submitter in the Amtrak description, the consider to have the note subject no objection to disclosure information sought by the Freedom of Information provided by the submitter with the response of the notice may be the subject of the Disclosure Freedom of Information Act. Alright, G. Notice the intent of the disclosure. Amtrak should consider the submitter with the objective specific ground for the disclosure, making the determination whether the disclosure of the information any of the instance of the decision is made with the disclosure of the information over the objective of the submitter. The Amtrak shall give to the submitter with a written note which shall include the statement of the reason why that each of the submitter for the objective of the disclosure would be sustained, the description of the information to be disclosed, a specified disclosed date for the which for the reasonable time subsequent for the note to determine the Amtrak as a whole discretion. H for the note exemption for the notice requirement. The notice requirements for the section shall not apply. Amtrak to determine the information which should not be disclosed. The information has been published when it has been only officially made available. The public disclosure of the information required by the law other than Freedom of Information Act, the discretion made by the submitter with the paragraph C of this section appear for the obviously frivolous such of the Amtrak shall privately specify the disclosure date given the submitter written notice of the final decision to disclose the information. The information requested not designated with the submitter, example, the disclosure for the accordance with the part with the unless for the Amtrak has substantial reach for the unbelief to believe that the disclosure of the information would result in competition with the harm. Competitive harm. Note for the Freedom of Information Act allows to whenever the Freedom of Information Act requests to file with the law seeker to comply the disclosure of the business for the information the Amtrak shall promptly be notified by the submitter. Note for the request of the Amtrak provided the submitter with the note of any opportunity object to the disclosure some of them in the paragraph F of the section Freedom of Information Act, the officer shall notify the requester when the Amtrak notifies the submitter in intent with the disclosure request for the information on the paragraph G of the section of the Amtrak shall also notify the requester when the submitter filed with the lawsuit seeking the prevalent disclosure of the business information. Amtrak shall notify the requester. Alright, 701.10. Appeal. For the appeal for the first determination of the requesting part, they may appeal for the decision will hold any of the requested record will hold in part with the determination of the request for the record does not exist if it cannot be located the denial of the request for the expired treatment in disputed fee matter of the denial of the request for the fee of the request for a fee or waiver. The appeal must be addressed to the President of the Chief of the Officer of the care of the Chief Legal Officer of the General Counsel, National Railroad Passengers Corporation, 60 Massachusetts Avenue, Northeast Washington, D.C., 2002. The appeal must be written with a specified the relevant fact for the time over the basis of the appeal. The payable letter and available envelope should be marked with the prominent that the Freedom of Information Act with the appeal to ensure that they promptly write of the appeal that must be received by the President office within 90 days of the day of the denial of the appeal. The mail of the act will not be acted upon if the request becomes the matter of the Freedom of Information Act litigation. Responsible to the appeal, the decision of any of the appeals should be made with the writing decision upholding the adverse determination and hold with the part shall contain the statement for the reason for such action, including the Freedom of Information Act's exemption applied with the requesting of the part, but there should be divided with the provision judicial review of the decision contained in Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552A4B, engaging in dispute resolution, serving provided with the Office General OGIS, Office General and Information System, mediation, voluntary process for the Amtrak agree with the participation in the mediation of the program provided by the Office Government and Office of General Information System actively engaged with the partner with the intent with the resolve of the dispute. If the adverse determination adverse to the modified the appeal with the whole and part with the requesting part of shall notify that the request shall be processed in accordance with the decision when the appeal with is required with the requesting the part generally must timely appeal with the adverse determination prior to seeking the judicial review. All right, 70111 fee. For the general, the Amtrak subject shall charge for the processing of the request for the freedom of information in accordance with this section of fee with $38 per hour shall be charged for the search for the review for the information for the concerning the other processing of the paragraph E of the section. Amtrak shall collect for the applicable fee before the releasing the copy of the requested records. Requested part of the payment of the fee shall be made with a check of the money order payable to the National Railroad Passenger Corporation. Definition for the purpose of this section: direct costs mean for the list of the expense for the actually incurred with the searching for and retrieving in the case of the commercial with the request for reviewing and the record of the respondent with Freedom of Information Act costs. Request the direct cost include for the cost of the salary of the employee performing the work for the basic rate of the pay with the employee with the plus for the applicable benefits of the cost of the operating and reproduction and equipment. The direct cost does not include the overhead expense for the cost of the space for the heating and lighting of the facility. The reproduction meaning of the making of a copy of the record of information contained within order to respond with the Freedom of Information Act with the request scanned copies with the tape of the form of the paper, the microform, and the audio visual materials, electronic record of the magnetic tape of the disc, or disc, any other, among other types, and among others. Amtrak shall honor the request of the specified of the presence performance of the form of the disclosure record readily with the reproduce with the reasonable effort of the request of the format out for the respondent to the request. 3. Review. Means of the process of the examination recorder located with the response of the request determining whether one of the statutory exemption for the Freedom of Information Act comply with the processing aim of the record of disclosure, include with the doing and all of the necessary to eradicate the record of the prepare with the release of the review time, include with the time of the spent with the considerable form of the object for the disclosure of the commercial submitted with under 7019, but does not include the time of the spent resulting in the general legal policy regarding the application exemption review of the copy of the record, hoverable event, even if the record ultimately is not disclosed. Search means of the process for the looking for the retrieve of the record with the information responsible for the request and include with the page by page, line by line identification information with the record that include with the responsible with the efforts to locate the retrieve of the information records maintained with the electronic format and format. Fee to the category. The 4 categories of freedom of information request for the purpose of the commercial or the use of the requester representative of the news media, of the educational, non-commercial, scientific, institutional requesters, and other requesters for the categories are defined in the following paragraph at C1 through C and 5, and the applicable fees, which are the same of the 2 of the categories, will be specified in the paragraph D of the section. Commercial request for the term of the commercial use of the request to refer to the request of the form on the behalf of the person who seeks for the information for the use of the purpose of the commercial, the trade, the property, interest, including further those with interest for those of litigation. The Amtrak shall determine whenever the reasonable but the possible the use of which for the requester will be put in the record for the sub by the request which appear with the result of the requesting party will put the records in the commercial use of the either because of the nature of the request itself, because of the Amtrak has reasonable case of the doubt with the state of the intent of the use. Amtrak shall provide the requesting party with the opportunity to submit the further clarification when the requester does not examine the use of the where the explanation for the insufficient. The Amtrak may draw the reasonable interference with the requesters identifying charge and accordingly. Representative of the news media or the news media requesters refers to any of the personal and any of the that gathered information. Potential interest for the segment of the public use of the editorial skill of the term of the raw material with the distinct with the work with the distributed work with the audience of the paragraph of the term of the news media of the media information that is about with the current events that would be current interests of the public. Example, the news media of the entity of the television radio station broadcast to the public at large and publishers periodically, but only with such of the entity of the qualified disseminator for the news who make their products available for the purchase for them by subscription for the free distribution of the general public. For these examples, they're not exclusive. Moreover, the method of the new delivery involved with the fourth example, the adoption of electronic dissemination of the newspaper through the telecommunications service for the alternative media should be considered with the news media and even the free land for the journals should be regarded with the work of the news media and even the journalists for the can be demonstrated with the solids bay for the expedition. Expecting publication throughout the entity, whether or not the journalist is actually employed by the entity, publication contract would represent the solid base for the subject of the exemption with the Amtrak would be considered the path of the public record for the request for the making so for the determination. Educational institution refers to the preschool for the public, the private, the elementary for the secondary school for the institution for the undergraduate higher education institution, graduating higher education for the institution, professional education or institution for the vocational education that operates for the program scholarly research to be in the category of the requester must show that the request for the authorized to by and it's made by the auspicious qualifying institution that records are not so for commercial use, but as further scholarly research. Non-commercial scientific institution. It refers to the institution that has not operated with a commercial base as the term of the defined in paragraph C1 of the section that operated with the sole of the purpose of conducting scientific research with the result of the video not intended to promote the particular product of the industry with the B in the category of the requesting part of the show of the request for the authority to buy with the made under the gas bushes. Qualifying institutions that the records the shop of the commercial with the further scientific research. The other requests refer to the request of the lieutenant coming on the preview of the paragraph C1 through 4 of the section assessing fee of the response of the Freedom of Information Act whether the Amtrak should charge the following fees and left of the waiver over the reduction of the fees have been granted without paragraph K of the section commercial use of the requester to the fileable allowable direct call for the search for reviewable duplication of records. Representative of the news media of the educational and non-commercial scientific institution requested duplication charges only excluding charges for the first 100 pages other than requesters. The record also for the search and duplication of the record of the first 100 pages of the duplication of the first 2 hours of search and should be provided without charge. Schedule of the fees manual with the search. The schedule of fees manual searcher's personal search time is includes time expanded with the manual with the search for the paper, the record search for the index for the review of the computer with the search result of the relevant record of the personal computer system of searches. 2. Computer search for the direct call for the conducting computer search will be charged for the direct call that will be included with the cost for the operating essential processing of the portion of the unit operating time of the directly attributed with the searching of the response of the records as well as the cost for the operating program salary and proportionable to the search. Duplication 3. Duplication fees. Duplication will be charged for all the requesters subject to the limitations specified in paragraph D of the section. Amtrak shall charge the 25% per page for a paper photocopy of the record, copy of the produced of the computer, such as tapes and printouts. Amtrak will charge for the direct call, including the operator time, and then producing a copy of the for other forms of the duplication. Amtrak will charge for the direct copy of the duplication. All right, 4. Review fee. If the review fees will be assessed for the commercial use for the request, such for the fee for the assets review for the conductor make with the internal determination of the upon the appeal with the review that can conclude with the determine whether an exemption of not previously considered as applicable. 5. Charges for their others for the actual cost of the amount with the B charge for all the other type of the output for the production, duplication, photograph of the map, for the printed material for the determination of the actual cost shall include for the commercial cost of the media for the personal time, the expended for the making of the time item available, the relief of the allocated cost for the equipment with which producing the item with the requesting part of the charge actual reproduction cost when a commercial service is required the item personal available the Amtrak will be made with available the publication price. 6. Charge for the special service. The part of the other provision for the section with the Amtrak for the part of the description to provide special service charge the service sending records by other ordinary mail with the direct cost of the providing such that the service shall be charged. Commitment to pay for the fees. Amtrak determined the estimate of the applicable fees will be likely to exceed $25. The requesting party will notify the actual estimated amount with being left with the written statement that has been received indicating willingness to pay all the fee for the particular request for the large and or unexpected the fees. Amtrak will require the specific commitment that when the estimated determining of the fees will exceed $100. C7015 with additional information. G. Restriction for the accessing fee for the general. The fees for the search review will be not charged for a quarter hour per period unless for more than half or then a period is required. All right, 2. Minimum fee. No fees will be charged with the cost of the collecting with the fee of the equal the greater than the fee of the shelf. The cost included with the cost of the Amtrak billing, receipt of the record with the process of the fee deposit was made deemed $10. Commercial search for the exemption of the request for the the document, the commercial fee for the Amtrak shall not charge for the fee for the computer search until the cost of the search equal the equivalent of the dollar amount of the 2 hours for the salary of the operator performing the search. The unusual circumstances. If the Amtrak determined the unusual circumstances defined in the Freedom of Information Act applied with the Amtrak as provided with the timely written over the requester according to the Title 5 U.S. Standard Code 552A6B, the Amtrak may be set for the search of the duplication of each of the applicable the additional 10 days. If the Amtrak fails to comply with the extent of the time limit, is non-searchable fee for the case for the request described in the paragraph D2 of the section. No duplication fees may be charged unless more than 5,000 pages are necessary to respond to the request at the time of the written over that has been sent out by the Amtrak to discuss with the requesting party via the written mail, email, telephone, may not less than 3 good faith attempts to do so. However, the requesting party could be effectively limited with the scope of the request. All right, non-protective search for the Amtrak may be charged with the time spent, but the search for the review, any with the record responsible for the records are not located with the records located, and determine the entire exemption for the disclosure advance payment for the Amtrak estimate of determined with the charge likely to exceed $250 advance payment of the entire fee may be required before continuing the process of the request. 2. When the requester has previously failed to pay with the properly charged with the Freedom of Information Act fee within 30 days of the date of the billing, Amtrak may require the full amount of the due plus the applicable interest for the advance payment of the full amount of the anticipated fees before the beginning with the profit of the new request, continuing with the profit the pending request for the time limits of the Freedom of Information Act will begin only after the Amtrak has received such payment. The Amtrak will hold the audience for 30 days of request for the deposits that are due, but the money is owned for the work order already completed with before the copies are sent with the request for the shall not be considered for the advance payment. 5. Amtrak shall not deem the request for the receiver in the case of which an advance deposit for the payment is due, but the further work will not be done until the required payment is received. The charging interest. Amtrak may be charged for the interest for the unpaid bill for the processing charge starting the 31st of the day of the following the day of the billing of the request for the interest charge that will be assessed at the rate of the Amtrak paid for the short-term borrowing. Okay, waiver the reduction fee for the automatic waiver of the fee when the cost of the Freedom of Information Act requires for $10 or less. The fee should be waived automatically for all requesters regardless of the category. 2 other fees require waivers. Receiving the waiver, the reduce the fee for the receiver, the automatic waiver, the threshold should be made within case-to-case basis for the record to respond with the request within further should be the sharp of the low of the established sharp of the Amtrak determined based on the available information for the disclosure of the request. The information in the public interest because it is likely to contribute to significantly publicly understanding of the operation activity of the Amtrak, and it is not primarily the commercial interest of the requesting party to determine whether the fee of the waiver requirement in paragraph A21 over the section does meet. The Amtrak will consider the following factors. 1. The subject for the requester with whether the subject requested records concerned with the objections, the operation of the activity of the Amtrak with the show with the request for the records must conservatively identify with the operation of the activity of the Amtrak without the connection with the direct for the clear and not remotely actuated. 2. The information value of the information of the disclosed, whether the disclosure is likely to contribute to the understanding of the Amtrak operation activity. The disclosable portion of the request of the record for the must be meaningful and informative of the Amtrak operation activities in order to be found with likely to contribute to the increase the public understanding of the operation activity. Disclosure of the information is that already with the public domain, either duplicated with a substantial identical form, would not be likely to contribute to such for the understanding whether new and would be added to the public understanding. 3. The contribution to and understanding with the subject for the public likewise to result with the disclosure with the requested information will contribute to public understanding with the disclosure must contribute to the understanding with the responsible broad audience of the person interested in the subject of the public the individual understanding with the requester ability to expertise with the subject areas as well with the requester intention to effectively convey the information with the public shall be considered. It shall be presumed that the representative of the news media will satisfy the consideration. 5. The significant contribution public understanding whether the disclosure is likely to be contributed significantly with the public understanding of the Amtrak operation of the activity. The public understanding of the subject for the question as compared with the level of the public understanding of the existing prior to the disclosure must be enhanced by the disclosure with a significant extent. All right, 4. To determine whether the fee with the waiver of the requirements of paragraph K22 with the section with the meet with the Amtrak will consider the following factor with the existing magnitude with the commercial interest with whether the request of the party with the commercial interest will be further with the request for the disclosure. Amtrak should clear any of the commercial interest with the requesting party with the reference of the definition commercial use. Paragraph C1 of the section for any of the person who of the app of the requesting party of the acting would be further with the request of the disclosure. Requesters should be given the opportunity to provide explanatory information regarding the consideration of the primary information disclosure, whether the magnitude of the identified with the commercial interest of the request with the significantly larger comparison with the public interest of the disclosure. Disclosure is primarily with the commercial interest of the request of the fee of the waiver of the induction and reduction with the justified with the public interest and with the satisfied public interest of the greater magnitude and identified with the commercial interest of the disclosure. Request for the fee of the waiver will be considered on a case-to-case basis based on the merits of the information provided with the difficulty to determine whether the request is commercial in nature for the Amtrak may draw with the interference of the requester identified with the circumstances of the requester for the waiver of the reduction must address the factors. This is in paragraph K3 and 4 with the section L and all keep the burden shall be the requesting party with the representative the evidence of the information support with the request for the waiver and fees. All right, aggregating request. The requester may not file with multiple requests at the same time in order to avoid payment of the fee, but the Amtrak responsible to believe the requester for the group of the request of the acting in concert of the attempting to provide the request of the receiver of the request for the proposed of the voiding of the fee of the Amtrak with the aggregate with the request for the charging accordingly. Amtrak may presume that the multiple requests of this type that may be made within 30-day period have been made in order to avoid fees when the requests are separated with a long period. The Amtrak may aggregate them only with existing responsible base for the determination. Aggregation warranted with the view with all of the circumstances involved. Multiple requests that involve with unrelated matters may not be aggregated. 701.12. Other rights served with nothing as a part of the constructive entity and then entitling any person to any of the right within any serve of the disclosure, any record to which such a person is not entitled under the Freedom of Information Act. Part 702 to 799 are reserved. And this was your reading of the Title 49, Chapter 7, National Railroad Passenger Corporation, Amtrak.